Please welcome your host for the opening ceremony, Emmy Award-winning meteorologist and environmental reporter at NBC News, Angie Lassman.
Hello, New York City, and a very warm welcome to Climate Week NYC. As you just heard, my name's Angie Lassman. I am a meteorologist and environmental reporter with NBC News, and it is such an honor to be here with you for this opening ceremony. On behalf of Climate Group, the organizers of Climate NYC, thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're here in the room or you're watching the live stream from every corner of the world, we are glad you're here. We gather at a pivotal moment. Alongside the UN General Assembly, the city once again becomes the stage where the world's leaders, thinkers, and innovators and citizens come together to decide how we respond to the most defining challenge of our time, the climate crisis. And this year, the urgency could not be clearer. The opening ceremony today is structured in two parts. We begin with the first segment, Hard Choices and the Real Consequences. And I think that title says it all. The world is changing faster than ever, geopolitically, economically, and environmentally. And at the heart of that turbulence lies the climate crisis. The choices we make today will determine whether we reduce risk or we amplify it, whether we seize the opportunity to lead or we watch others define the future. Then we turn to our second segment, Power On. This is the unstoppable transition already underway. We are in the midst of the greatest transformation of our age: clean energy, electrification, innovation at scale. And the question is not whether this transition will happen, it's how fast, how fairly, and who will lead it. For those leaning in, the competitive advantage is already here. The task is now to ensure the benefits reach everyone, everywhere. All sessions today are being streamed live at climateweeknyc.org. And if you're sharing your thoughts on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or Instagram, please use the hashtag ClimateWeekNYC to be a part of the global conversation. After our opening ceremony, we'll take a short break for lunch and then reconvene at 1:30 p.m. for the launch of the Hub Live. That's when this room becomes the beating heart of Climate Week NYC, a space for bold ideas, policy innovation, and practical solutions designed to spark dialogue, not just from the stage, but among all of you. So, how about we get started? The road ahead is demanding, but it's also filled with possibility. And with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the CEO of Climate Group, Helen Clarkson.
Hello and welcome to Climate Week NYC. It's so good to see you here today in New York City. And for those of you joining online, thank you so much for tuning in. Firstly, I want to thank our partners, especially Train Technologies, our headline partner, and McKinsey Sustainability, our opening ceremony partner, who've made this year possible. The theme of Climate Week NYC this year is Power On. It may seem contradictory to talk about power at a time when so many of us feel powerless. So many of us start our days as we know we shouldn't, on a horrified doom scroll, bearing witness to the ways in which the world is spiraling and feeling our lack of power or agency. We read endless opinions and polls, we can comment online, but in the end, we're just one person with one voice, one vote. You can donate money to the causes you believe in, but then if you're not a billionaire, does it all add up? Money talks, and at the moment, it's saying it doesn't want to give up any of the riches from fossil fuels and will prioritize wealth today over a secure future tomorrow. And of course, the climate is comprised of forces that are beyond our immediate control. Decades of emissions have already warmed the air and oceans, with impacts felt from Los Angeles to New Delhi, flooding, landslides, wildfires. And let's be honest about how we talk about climate change. We tell people about the massive problems and the radical systemic changes we need, and then when they say, what can I do? We offer them reusable tote bags and infographics. We've been selling a feeling of powerlessness. By trying to talk about a collective action problem at an individual level, of course, it doesn't add up. But Climate Week NYC has never been about what you can do as individuals. It's what we can do together. And today we've gathered leading politicians from all levels of government. We have decision makers from some of the biggest companies in the world. We have investors, philanthropists, consultants, NGOs, activists. We know that not everyone could travel here to New York City due to travel restrictions. But whether you're here in the room or online, we have the power to change things together. And if we look at some of the incredible achievements of the past year, they've all come through flexing those collective muscles, binding collective power. In Pakistan, solar power has become the country's largest energy source in just 2 years, up from 5th place in 2023. It wasn't government policy that drove this, it was people. In the face of exceptionally high domestic electricity prices, they started sharing TikTok videos showing easy DIY installation of low-cost Chinese solar panels at home. Now the extent of that rooftop solar boom is visible on Google Earth. Even in rural villages, up to 50% of the roofs have solar panels. And as a result, the demand for electricity on Pakistan's national grid is going down, and sales of diesel dropped 35% last year. And that's an incredible example of the power of collective demand. Then there's the recent landmark opinion from the International Court of Justice, starting with a group of 27 students at the University of the South Pacific in 2019, who crowdfunded just $35 for their first banner. They gained the backing of Vanuatu's then Foreign Minister, Ralph Reagan-Vanu, who we're proud to have here with us today, and they won the support of 132 countries at the UN General Assembly. The result, the ICJ declared climate change an existential problem of planetary proportions and affirmed that states have binding obligations to protect the climate. Choices made by individuals in Pakistan or a group of students in the Pacific shifted energy markets and changed the course of legal rulings. And this happened through their collective action. At Climate Group, we use the collective power and of businesses and governments to drive change. For example, our RE100 campaign, where businesses commit to sourcing 100% renewable electricity. In 2019, they were telling us that South Korea was one of the hardest places for companies to purchase renewables. So we got to work, found a local partner to help us understand the Korean market. And 6 years later, Climate Group is now working with companies representing 10% of the country's electricity use. And they want to switch that to renewables. That's a powerful collective corporate voice, and we're using it to drive policy change in the country. President Lee Jae-myung highlighted RE100 in his inaugural speech a few months ago as a symbol of the country's renewable energy strategy. And he's announced a series of policy measures to speed up this transition that were partly based on our input, including RE100 industrial zones. And that's reflective of changes across the world that are starting to hurt the fossil fuel markets. More than 20% of new cars sold worldwide last year were electric. The global stock of electric cars displaced over 1 million barrels per day of oil consumption in 2024, according to the IEA. Wall Street's 6 largest banks cut their financing of oil, gas, and coal projects by 25% this year. The scales are tipping away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy. Of course, globally, there are still major barriers ahead. How do we get the renewable electricity boom onto national grids? How do we counter misinformation? How do we stay competitive in a fast-changing world where different crises are dominating the headlines? These are the problems that we need to come together on this week. And it's collective power that will solve these types of problems. And that's exactly what Climate Week NYC is about this year more than ever. Because who'd have thought that together we'd deliver the biggest Climate Week NYC yet, with more events, more sponsors, more government leaders than last year when the world looked so different. And we didn't even have to move it to Canada. We're here to power on. In the end, we either will have a livable planet or we won't. It's an uphill struggle, but we know we don't have a choice. It's up to us to protect what we love. Thank you. Before we go to the next session, I want to thank all our sponsors again who've made this event possible: Train Technologies, McKinsey Sustainability, and so many other valued partners. And now to set the tone for the conversations ahead, we'll turn to our first speaker, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, His Excellency Gaston Brown, who will address the hard economics of our warming world. So let's get to it. It's time to power on.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On November 1st, 1981, our country became a proud, independent nation, one of the smallest in the world, one of the most resource-scarce but resilient. That same spirit of resilience carried us through hurricanes, economic shocks, and the test of nation building. 44 years later, that resilience is now under siege by a climate crisis that we did not create. Climate change is a threat multiplier. For small islands, it turns every storm into a fiscal catastrophe, every drought into a food security emergency, and every inch of sea level rise into an existential threat. Hurricane Irma in 2017 destroyed 95% of the homes in our sister island, Barbuda, and left a recovery bill exceeding $200 million United States dollars. Even storms that veer away drain millions from our budget in preparedness alone. Antigua and Barbuda emits less than 0.01% of global emissions, but suffers the injustice of disproportionate climate impact. Every degree of warming is an invoice, literally a demand sent to small islands that we cannot afford to pay. The IPCC warns that even a temporary overshoot of 1.5 degrees risks irreversible loss of coral reefs and fisheries, lifelines for all peoples. Droughts destroy crops and livestock, while rising seas eat away at our coast and tourism revenues. We have invested in building resilience. We have improved building codes, rainwater harvesting, desalination, and climate-smart agriculture. And we have done so to increase food and water security, but we are still struggling. The science is very clear. Event attribution research now quantifies the human fingerprint on extreme weather, proving that these losses are not acts of God, but consequences of greenhouse gas emissions. This turns loss and damage from a moral appeal into a legal and financial reality. Yet, climate pledges are measured in millions, while needs are in the hundreds of billions. We cannot afford a loss and damage fund that's another empty shell. It should be adequately capitalized to provide meaningful and predictable financing. And I now speak to the issue, that vexing issue of GDP per capita income. GDP per capita cannot capture our reality. It disqualifies us from much needed financing. Therefore, we issue a clarion call for the use of the MVI, which is a fairer compass. The Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, the ABAS, calls for scaled, accessible, just financing for oceans to be treated as central to planetary stability, for full capitalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, and for SIDS special circumstances to be mainstreamed across every negotiation. Distinguished colleagues, climate financing is not charity. It is justice, and it is certainly survival, especially for small island developing states. Loss and damage is not theory. It is lived reality. Climate finance is not optional. It is quintessential to development. Our people do not seek sympathy. We demand a world where resilience is not the ceiling of our ambition, but the bridge to justice, to dignity, security, and shared prosperity. I thank you. Blessings.
Thank you, Prime Minister Gaston Brown, for that powerful keynote. You, of course, reminded us that the economics of a warming world aren't abstract. They're lived reality for leaders and citizens alike. Balancing growth, affordability, and resilience is, of course, no small task, and your insights today set the stage for the urgent work ahead. Next, we shift from the economics of climate to the politics and diplomacy that will make or break our collective progress. With the next round of NDCs approaching, ambition alone won't cut it. Implementation is everything. It's time to ask the hard questions. Are our climate commitments driving real change, or are they recycled promises? Can multilateralism deliver the trust when trust is fragile and timelines keep slipping? To explore this, please welcome Ambassador Andre Correa del Lago, COP30 President-Designate, and Simon Steele, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, and Dr. Shampa Patel, Executive Director of Government and Policy at Climate Group.
Good morning, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be with you all this morning. For this first session, the time is now, rebuilding trust in a decade that delivers. Now, this is said every year that this COP is the most important COP to come. But in many ways, COP30 in Brazil is a very, very important one. As was already mentioned, this is a year the countries are supposed to submit their enhanced NDCs. And some of the biggest major economies have still yet to submit those plans. So looking ahead, it's really important to think through with our guests with us here today, how do we make that ambition a reality? We are seeing nations either walking back or actively undermining their commitments, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are green shoots. For the first time, well, maybe not for the first time, but the investment in renewables is now double that of the investment in fossil fuels. So there's certainly ground for optimism and opportunities that can be built on, and there are no two better speakers than our colleagues here, Ambassador del Lago and Simon Steele of the UNFCCC, that we can have this conversation with. So turning to you first, Ambassador, the presidency has released a really ambitious action agenda. In many ways, it consolidates the outcomes from the previous COPs. What to you would signal success? What do we need to land this year that really shows that we're taking the climate emergency seriously?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with all of you. Look, what I believe is important is for people to have confidence in the process again and understand what the process is all about. And it's true that sometimes we talk about climate in a way that we don't want people to meddle into the discussion, etc. We need to bring people to the discussion. And I think that the most efficient way of doing it is really to show that what we've negotiated all those years give us enough directions and enough mandates for an economic, completely different moment. So we need to take this moment, and that's why we use what we already approved, and we say, look, there are lots of solutions. There is a mandate to do it. Let's do. But we have to show that there are solutions, and we have to show that it is economically intelligent, logic, and useful to fight climate change, for jobs, for development. And I think this message is not fully perceived. So I think that the action agenda would love to be able to do that people leave COP30 believing, yes, this is the agenda, this is the direction we have to go.
Absolutely. And Simon, in many ways, the Paris Agreement was one of the high points of multilateralism, where we were able to get nations together behind a common goal. But it is challenging in the current context. What do you see as the role of UNFCCC in mobilizing momentum to achieve these goals, given some of the complexities that we all know exist at the moment?
Well, thank you, Shampa, and good morning to all. I think the first thing that we need to do is to kind of recognize where we are. We are at the 10-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect back on where we came from, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what's needed to move forward. And there's often criticism about the process. It is slower than science dictates. It is a very complex process, but it is delivering results. If we look at this 10-year journey since Paris, before Paris, the world was on a 5-degree global heating trajectory. We're now down to around 3 degrees. When we synthesize these next emissions of NDCs, we'll see how much closer to 1.5 we are. We won't be at 1.5, but we will have inched forward. So progress is being made. And looking at the value of the process, there is no other. Within the Paris Agreement, 195 countries. The complexities of getting them to agree based on a consensus-based process is difficult, but it is delivering. What COP30 presents us with an opportunity to do is, first of all, removing this preconception that every COP must deliver everything. I think those are expectations that we set that aren't the most helpful. So if we look at COP21 Paris, where a framework was put in place, those negotiations over the 10-year period, getting us to COP28, where we had the first global stocktake, which was an opportunity for a temperature gauge as to, again, where we were, and that course correction. How do we close that ambition and implementation gap? Last year in Baku, the new finance goal. So yes, the number, the 300 billion per year is lower than developing countries need, but it is a tripling of what there was before. In Belém, there will be a presentation of how the roadmap to get that to 1.3 trillion. So recognition that we need to scale up on finance. But within the context of these nationally determined climate plans, what commitments are countries themselves making, taking the global stocktake, taking that global roadmap, and then distilling that down into what national commitments will be made. So there is an opportunity for that course correction to really take effect. And as Andre was alluding to, how do we start bringing the process closer to real economies, closer to people, closer to communities?
Yeah, and I think you both touched on this. It's a really important aspect, and one where perhaps the climate community has more work to do, which is how we frame the opportunity. Both of you spoke about that. You know, it can become a very dry technical conversation around decarbonisation, but it is about communities, it is about people, healthy lifestyles, opportunities, economic transformation. What do you think is needed for us to move in the right direction so that we can bring along those people who think the net zero is a cost on the pocket, on the individual taxpayer? What can be done to move us in the right direction of seeing the economic opportunities that are possible and the social opportunities through a net zero transformation? Perhaps, Ambassador, to turn to you first.
Well, I think that, first of all, that we cannot expect governments to do everything. But it's true that only governments can negotiate, so it's a bit unfair. But I think that once there is a result of this negotiation, then you see how, for instance, subnational governments have an amazing role to play. Business, obviously, but technology, academia, and civil society in general. We have to bring back the perception that this is walking in the right direction and that there is a progress. And I think there definitely is, because we had a phase in which we had to stimulate the renewables, we had to give subsidies, etc. Now we're entering a phase in which people are afraid of renewables, and now they're punishing renewables. So I think that something is going very right for this reaction to happen. But we cannot accept the narrative that this process is not working. On the opposite, I think that the reaction we see today is the proof that the process is working.
Absolutely. And Simon, you've also spoken recently about the importance of the NDC set a framework, but the signal it sends to the real economy is really important. And I know that you've spoken about this recently.
No, I mean, in your opening, you spoke of investments in renewables. Last year, 2 trillion in renewables, 1 trillion in fossil fuels. You look at the economics of where we are, where 90% of renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. So we're seeing momentum build. I think part of the challenge that we have within the process is dejargonizing. It is making what we're doing more consumable in living rooms. And also, yes, we speak about the climate impacts. We speak about what's happening within vulnerable communities around the world, which is increasing, accelerating. But not enough time is spent on discussing the benefits of climate action, and how that, again, coming back to living rooms, how that impacts ordinary people, you know, in their daily lives. And I think when we can start translating that, I think that starts cutting through some of the alternative narratives that are presented. But it's also the relationship between the process and what's happening within the real economy, because things are moving irrespective of what is happening within the process, and how we can create that kind of virtuous loop between the process, the real economy, so that real economy ambition and action can drive progress within the process, and the process, again, driving that external. And that's precisely what Brazil has at the heart of what will be delivered in Belém this year.
Absolutely. And now turning to you, Ambassador, Simon just talked about ensuring that we are, in this transformation, able to speak to the needs of those most directly impacted, the poor, the vulnerable. COP is obviously taking place in Belém, in the heart of the Amazon. Climate justice has been at the core of what the Brazilian presidency has put the center of this COP. To you, why is that important, and how do you see efforts to mobilize towards that?
Yes, that's why, we thought since the beginning of the Brazilian presidency to use that indigenous concept that all Brazilians know very well, which is called the mutirão, now pronounced mutirão. No? So the idea of the mutirão is that everybody can do something in their capacity, as long as you know where you're going, and as long as you go with enormous independence. I think that there was too much focus on trying to organize what people had to do. I think that now the idea is already ingrained enough for people to go in the direction doing what they can do. And the symbolism of doing this COP in the Amazon, in a city in the Amazon, because many people don't imagine, but the scale of the Amazon in Brazil is really amazing, because the biome Amazon is larger, inside Brazil, is larger than entire India, and has 15.5 million people living in the area of India. And these people are 75% urban. So the solutions that you need for the Amazon are not the first ones that come to our mind and think that everybody is living in the forest or something like that. So there are so many ideas that are coming from the Amazon. Just that, for me, already makes COP30 a success. When I received from all the technological universities in the Amazon solutions for the 30 priorities that we established for the action agenda. It was amazing. They took that and they analyzed between themselves, and they told me it's the first document in which they put together all the institutions of the Amazon. So that touches more directly people. It's not about something vague. It's about something that reaches people. And I really think I will always remember that day in Manaus as one of the best moments that I could imagine in the preparation of COP30.
Thank you. And Simon, turning to you now for the final question. We've talked about, despite some of the challenging geopolitical context, just how much space there is for opportunity and transformation. What does the UNFCCC, how do you plan to harness that, mobilize that in the run-up to COP30? How can we make the voice of business, of subnational governments, all those critical stakeholders that can shift the real economy, part of the process in a way when we know it's a state-party process, it's only nations that can negotiate, but how can they be effectively mobilized in this year's COP?
Well, I think it comes back to the vision of the presidency, Brazilian presidency, which is so timely. We've spent effectively 10 years bringing the Paris Agreement into force. And we keep speaking of this era of implementation, from negotiations to implementation. And we've had a number of COPs where that has been one of the talking points. But that truly comes to bear now at COP30, where all of the components of the Paris Agreement are now in place. The final pieces were put in place in Baku. And the focus now is about rolling sleeves up and getting on with the job. We have the tools, we have the technologies, we know what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, who needs to do it, and when. So bringing that all together in an inclusive way that doesn't only speak of government action, it does speak of subnationals, the private sector, civil society, all actors involved, and how we mobilize that. What will be delivered at the end of this month, all countries are supposed to have submitted their NDCs by the end of this month. We will hear a snapshot of those deliveries in the SG's special event on Wednesday. We'll hear a number of declarations then. But they all come together at the end of the month. We, as a Secretariat, will synthesize those in October and publish a state of where we are. We know they're going to be softer than what science dictates. The focus when we arrive at Belém will not be what countries are presented, but how will they respond to those submissions. And that primary response is about accelerating implementation, just getting it done.
Absolutely, and what great point to end on. As you say, even if the targets are soft, there are so many stakeholders that can be mobilized to ensure real-world implementation. And this COP30 has all the ingredients to be a COP of transformative delivery. So unfortunately, even though we're out of time, this is really scratching the surface of the conversation that needs to be had. But we know that there is a clear roadmap between here and Belém. So look forward to continuing this conversation with you all and our colleagues. If you could join me in thanking Ambassador Delago and Simon Steele.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Correa Delago, Executive Secretary Steele, and Dr. Shampa Patel for that thought-provoking discussion. Over the years, COPs have sparked debate. Some celebrate progress, others question whether the pace is enough. But your insights remind us that multilateralism still works when leaders commit to trust, accountability, and real action. With COP30 on the horizon, it's clear that the next decade can be one of delivery, not just ambition. Now we turn to the very real cost of inaction in our next conversation. The price of inaction, what could the point of no return cost us? A 3°C world is no longer abstract. It means extreme heat, food insecurity, financial instability, and uninsurable assets. In this session, we'll explore how prepared are we, what are the costs of irreversible triggers, and what actions can we take to adapt. I am honored to be joined by the Honorable Ralph Regenvanu, Minister of Climate Change for the Republic of Vanuatu, and Dr. Sabine Maurer, First Deputy Governor and CFO of Deutsche Bundesbank. Please welcome them to the stage. Thank you both for being here. Minister, I'm going to start with you first, because we know Vanuatu has been living on the front lines of climate change impacts already. It's been decades. When you look at what could happen if the world doesn't act, what does that price of inaction really look like on the ground for the people of your country?
Well, what it looks like is you lose those things which are so central to your identity, like the land that you've lived on for centuries, your family, your ancestors, that you hoped to give to your children. You lose markers in the landscape that tell your stories. So it's really non-economic stuff. Of course, you have all the great economic costs, financial costs of climate change, which we hear about. It's in the Paris Agreement, climate finance. But the things that really hit home are those losses. And you have countries in the Pacific, for example, like Tuvalu, like Kiribati, low-lying atolls, 2 meters above sea level at the highest. Think about losing entire countries. Where are these people who have lived on these atolls for centuries going to go? How are they going to maintain their identity? And think about the young people who are dislodged from this heritage, from this understanding of the environment they have. And we're seeing this happening. And so it's really about the rights people have to live in this world, which are dependent on a healthy environment, which provides your identity, your raison d'etre for living, being removed by climate change. And that's what we're seeing in the Pacific already. Large areas of previously habitable land lost, including graveyards, including markers of historical connection to the land and to the seas, the very essence of what makes us human beings.
And this isn't just your country. This is many countries in that region and across the globe, right?
Yeah, my country is fortunate. We are high islands, so we're going to lose a lot of the low lands, but we can move. But these atoll countries I'm talking about, similar to Maldives and the Indian Ocean, you're talking about whole countries that are going to be submerged. This is this whole thing about recognizing maritime boundaries, recognizing statehood after the baselines are gone. And this is something that we're pushing in the United Nations as well, to get international recognition that when we lose this land, it won't mean we lose our statehood, even though it loses a lot of our identity.
Interesting. Okay, so Dr. Mauro, the minister paints a pretty stark picture there for communities that are at risk now and potentially in the future. As the chair for the Network for Greening the Financial System, recent scenarios and reports from the network lay out stark economic risks as well if the current policies exist. So first, tell us what that data is. And secondly, if you can tell us how we start to move beyond modeling and see shifts in investment strategy across the financial sector now and in the future.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm representing the central banks, and of course I have to talk about economics. So the data clearly show that there is a strong incentive to do something about climate change and also the loss of natural resources. So maybe I think for you, the second question you put was, for me, the most important one. How do we change the behavior of companies? And because they are the ones that cause the emissions and that cause climate change. So I think in this regard, human behavior as well is driven by economics. So be it a family father or a CEO of an S&P 500 company. So what drives them, or what does that mean in terms of climate change? Either a company understands that climate change or the loss of nature assets like water and plants costs them quite a lot of money, and so they have to change their behavior, their business model. Or second opportunity is they've understood that climate change also offers them some business opportunities. So the latter one is true for a lot of Chinese companies, also some European companies. They have understood that climate change, or dealing with climate change, there is a business opportunity for them in. So be it offering clean tech, clean energy, sustainable finance. That's, and science tells them and data tells them that what they are doing is serving the needs of the future, of the people's future. The other thing is, if companies realize that climate change or the scarcity of nature assets like plants or water will cost them a lot, then they also tend, or the probability that they change their behaviors is pretty huge. So let me just take the examples of the food industry is very obvious. due to droughts, floods, and so on. But also fashion, you need a lot of water to produce jeans or whatsoever. Financial industry, because the risk that their clients deal with climate is huge. Or let's talk about pharmaceutical industry, about insurance companies that have to cover all the losses from climate change or natural disasters. So let's be very clear, most of the industries will be affected by climate change. And if a corporate has understood that, they are most likely to react and change their behavior.
It seems like they have to look ahead, but a lot of times it takes a lot to change the culture of a company and to do that. But Minister, as we outlined in the introduction, for countries like yours, climate change is a now problem. How are communities, you laid out all the ways they are already being affected, but how are communities in your country adapting on the ground? And what can other places that aren't feeling those impacts now learn from that?
Yes, thank you. I think in my country, as I said, we have the options because we are indigenous people, so the people have a long connection with the land and through our constitution have access to the land, so our communities can move. They can move from low-lying areas to higher ground. They can move from areas that are being inundated by salt water to other areas. And so we are very fortunate that that's happening, and we can also take on our traditional knowledge to learn how to adapt. We've been living in these areas for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Build on that traditional knowledge which can help us adapt to different changes in weather or living patterns. We can also adopt new things we haven't done before, like replanting mangroves. Is a new Western science intervention to help us adapt to rising seas. But there are limits to adaptation, of course. And this is where we need action by the global community. We are a country that's contributed 0.016% of global warming, and yet we are on the front line. And I just want to say, we are on the front lines, but everyone will get there eventually. Yeah. We will all be on the front lines. And so it's important for us to take action globally, which is why Vanuatu spearheaded this case to get an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the impact on human rights of climate change. Our right to exist, the right to life, the right to health, the right to practice your culture, practice your sovereignty as a state, as a country that's decided to take a particular projection into the future, and this right being impeded by the actions of other states, the conduct of other states, which has caused climate change, which basically narrows all our options. Right. And so in this light, we need to see the international community taking more action on this because it becomes a human rights issue now. And a clean and healthy environment is a fundamental human right under international law, and this was just affirmed by the advisory opinion. And that needs to be translated into the rights of future generations to continue to enjoy a planet as we have. And unfortunately, it's not happening. So we're looking to, particularly this upcoming COP, for example, for NDCs that are aligned with the Paris Agreement, what it said about the most ambitious goals. And all we can do is continue to advocate for the highest ambition as we have for decades.
So it seems that your impression is that there are lessons that people can learn from the actual things that are happening on the ground in your country, but there's a broader conversation about adopting this future kind of plan and agreeing to the fact that it's part of a human rights issue.
Yes, I think all communities in the world will have adaptation that they can engage in from their own history, from their own heritage, and governments, city councils, everyone can. We're all working on it. We're all working on these adaptation measures, but the key message is we can do as much as we can, but we can't do it without this international cooperation that really sees us address climate change at its source, which is cutting emissions, which is dealing with the fossil fuel problem, trying to get us off this destructive path we're on that will not help us to make these adaptation solutions work.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And Dr. Moderer, so what shifts are needed to ensure that the economies and markets are not just reactive, but actually helping communities before crises hit?
Yes, first of all, I also would like to highlight that is really, I mean, the planet, our planet, the planet of the next generations is a human right. So we really have to bear it in mind. But what we also have to face is the reality that there is a difference between an NGO and a corporate. A corporate has the goal of making money. It's for profit. So as I said before, a company either is adjusting because the costs are so high, the cost of a hurricane, the cost of droughts, floods, wildfires, and so on, or they see business opportunity and adapt because of that. And therefore, I mean, highlighting also the importance of our COPs, what I think in this regard is extremely important is that we talk to those who cause the emissions. That is the corporate sector. It is important that negotiators negotiate about volumes and money that's needed, definitely. But at the same time, if we do not take care about those who cause the emissions and are in a dialogue, if there is a disconnect between those causing and that those are perceiving the climate risk, then it's difficult, right? Maybe if you allow me just a final remark also on adaptation. Of course, global Earth warming is taking place and we have to adapt to a warmer world. At the same time, we all know that we will or we cannot adapt to a hot house world scenario. So having said that, I think we really have to bear in mind that we need to adapt, this is clear, but adaptation has its clear limits.
Any parting thoughts from either of you? We're nearly out of time. Anything additional that you think is important that people in the audience or people at home should hear?
Vanuatu initiated this request for an advisory group from the ICJ, and we are now building a coalition of countries to take it back to the General Assembly. We hope to take it to the General Assembly after the COP so that the UN system, which asked for this opinion, can accept it back and operationalize it in all the organs of the UN and all states. So this is a way we're trying to translate this legal precedent into operational action across the world. And these are not new legal obligations. These are already existing obligations that countries have to be more serious about implementing.
Thank you both so much for your time. It was an incredibly interesting conversation with both of you. We have learned that the price of inaction is very real, but there's also opportunities to protect and adapt these communities like Vanuatu and across the globe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Great job. Great conversation. Thank you. All right. Up next, we hear from Mark Patel, Senior Partner at McKinsey & Company. And with his experience advising some of the biggest businesses in the world, he'll share insights on navigating today's energy transition and finding ways to accelerate decarbonization. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with such a thoughtful audience and among such accomplished and distinguished speakers. We're at a moment which feels different to when many of you met a year ago and different to years past. Does it feel different? In fact, in this moment, there's a lot of discussion about whether the climate mission has lost momentum and whether, in fact, it's now fractured. In recent years, we observed a rare sense of alignment. Companies, communities, governments, with a shared commitment and a common goal. For a moment, we could see a path forward in unison. Now we have commentators asking if that was an illusion, the appearance of cohesion that's now left us. And not only is that discouraging, but it has the feel of a world that's been turned upside down. Some of you will have read Alice Through the Looking Glass. I'm reading it with my daughter right now. In the book, Lewis Carroll describes a similarly upside down world. One in which everything is reversed, including logic. Running helped Alice remain stationary. Walking away brings her towards it. You may feel that you've gone through the looking glass recently, and it's disorienting. So let me tell you what we at McKinsey see through our looking glass on climate. And I think it's a great time to be taking that pulse. Firstly, we see that decarbonization goals are now part of a much more complex mosaic. The goals are subordinate often to what are perceived as more urgent priorities. War and the interests of national security, protection and creation of jobs, a regional push to preserve energy independence. And this little thing that's become a big thing that's in everyone's newsfeed, AI, a relentless deployment of private capital into infrastructure and driving energy demand. The greatest deployment of capital in history, $5.2 trillion between now and the end of the decade, to establish data centers and the energy infrastructure required to support it. And the urgency to scale that infrastructure is reigniting a demand for fossil sources and is competing for our natural resources. So how should we read into this upside-down world, this disorienting feeling? Well, perhaps the greatest realization is that the transition to a lower carbon planet is no longer a monolithic journey. Whereas in recent years, we looked to a common global goal, to decarbonization commitments that went across boundaries, and to this unique unifying force, we now have to accept that it looks a lot more fragmented. And it presents us with real contradictions. If I look at India, I see the fastest and most accelerated deployment of renewables on the planet today. But I also see an expansion in coal capacity. In 2025, we'll see China at the turning point where EV adoption passes ICE adoption, and we see more EVs sold than ICE vehicles in this year. But meanwhile, in Europe and the US, we're faltering in our drive to electrify mobility. And if I look at the corporate efforts that bound companies together globally in the last 5 years, the coalitions and the efforts to drive to a standard path to net zero, we see that in some cases, momentum is being lost as corporates instead choose to find a path alone. So what are we left with as an impression in this upside-down world? Is progress slowing? Has common purpose been lost? Well, I want to make the case that on closer inspection, we might reach some different conclusions. Yes, the trajectory may look different depending on where you stand, but it's not all bad news. And let me give you a few examples. The energy sector transition is gathering momentum. You heard some of our speakers say that this morning. In low emissions power, we're closing in on that critical cruise speed, the point at which the renewable electron, not just locally, but globally, is lower cost than the fossil-based alternative. In the first half of 2025, we saw a continued momentum of deployment, 65% more additions of solar and wind than the prior year. Secondly, we have another phenomenon which we should celebrate. There is a new industrial model for how we develop and deliver these technologies to market. We are ramping technologies faster, and we're showing that on a consistent basis, they can come to market faster. Disruptors in the vehicle space are 2 times faster from concept to launch than the incumbents. A leading China auto OEM takes 21 months from the drawing board to getting product into market in the EV space. The US disruptors have shown that they can do it in 36 months. We're halving the time that it takes to develop products and bring them to market when there's an urgency to deliver innovation to the consumer. In front of our eyes, a completely new industrial model has been born because of this transition. And let me come back to AI. Let's take a moment to examine its impact a little bit more carefully. I've already said that AI is the greatest single deployment of private capital in history. I also said that it's driving a rapid rise in energy demand. But that isn't the only part of the AI story. It's also a story of renewed and accelerated renewable uptake and cheap batteries. It's unlocking an acceleration in promising nuclear technologies and some old ones. We saw the 20-year PPA on 3 Mile Island as an example of where existing nuclear infrastructure is being brought back in service of AI. And it's triggering an acceleration in battery innovation, not only at the chemistry level, at the form factor, but also at the physics of storage. AI and its insatiable need for more compute power will also be the innovation that drives the 10x and hopefully the 100x increase in efficiency at the semiconductor and transistor level. Those are the innovations and the scale of innovation that we should expect and demand as we go through this. So let me bring us back to Alice in the Looking Glass. As we go through the Looking Glass, perhaps the view is not as disorientating as it first seemed. There's real fractures in this monolithic effort to decarbonization. And the fractures are likely here to stay. But if we can harness the loss of the monolithic global approach, and we can use the fractures as fissures for innovation, and even for the application of self-interest to greater impact, then we can preserve and potentially accelerate the path. I hope you'll take the time this week to debate and reflect on the opportunity ahead, recognizing that both things can be true. Thank you. It's been an honor to talk to you all today.
Please welcome Governor Bill Ritter Jr., Chair of the U.S. Board for Climate Group, Gary Iocco, Mayor of Red Wing, Minnesota, Melissa Logan, Mayor of Blytheville, Arkansas, and Farmer Lee Jones, founder of the Chef's Garden.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to hear that there are some good tailwinds for businesses in spite of some very difficult times. Now we're going to turn our attention to another subject that really is impacted in a very significant way by climate, and that's water. It's a topic really close to my heart as the former governor of Colorado, because we're a state with 7 different rivers that have headwaters in Colorado. We have compacts on all those rivers, and climate has really impacted our ability to meet our responsibilities under that. But we're going to talk about different rivers than the ones in Colorado today. We're going to talk about the Mississippi River and Lake Erie. Like the rivers I know so well, the Mississippi is more than just water. It's an economic engine, a cultural lifeline, and a source of food and livelihood for millions. But like many other natural ecosystems, it isn't exempt from the impact of a warming climate. We've already heard the folks who are with me on the panel, Mayor Iocco, Mayor Logan, Farmer Jones, and they're here today to discuss what we're going to talk about, the subject of water and how it impacts them. So Mayor Logan, we're going to start with you. Mississippi River is more than just water. As I said, it's a symbol of the communities and livelihoods that depend on rivers. It happens to be, no, it does not happen to be far from your town. We discussed this. It's 5 miles from the center of your town, I think, the Mississippi. What comes to mind about how small towns depend on water and the land around them?
First of all, I just want to say thanks to the Climate Group for having this critical discussion concerning the Mississippi River this morning. I also want to share that I'm not just representing the city of Blytheville. Many of you probably have never heard of Blytheville. We sit in the northeast corner of Arkansas, but we sit absolutely directly on the Mississippi River. I'm here representing a group of mayors. There are 108 of us along the Mississippi River corridor, and we are all a part of a group, Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, and our job is to advocate for policy concerning the river and what happens as far as the sustainability is concerned. It's crucial to my city because I am a part of, I have a twin city that's located 17 miles south of me, and we are known as the land of steel. We are the largest steel producing county in the United States of America. About 400, 500 billion tons of steel literally traffic that water daily for our recyclables, and we also are a hub for grain. Soybeans, cotton, corn, peanuts are all floating up and down the Mississippi River. And so since 2005, we've sustained about $250 billion in damages due to drought, flood, weatherization, and named storms. We had a horrible spring this year. We had tornadoes ripping up and down that Mississippi River corridor like we asked for it. Even now, we are in a 4-year drought. And so when the river is low, barge traffic cannot navigate the river waters that are surrounding our cities. And so it's hard to bring goods and services up or down the Mississippi River. And so not only does it hurt communities like mine economically, but it does affect the food prices in the world. I do want to inflect right here that the Mississippi River is responsible for feeding 1 in 12 people around this entire world. And so it's very critical to my community that we make this river more resilient.
It's a staggering statistic. Thanks for sharing that. So Farmer Jones, your Mississippi River happens to be Lake Erie, and it affects your farm every season. And what you may not have heard in the introduction is Farmer Jones is one of the experts, subject matter experts in regenerative farming and ships commodities throughout the world to some of the best chefs in the world. So let's just talk about how the rivers and the lakes influence the way farming communities operate today.
Well, I appreciate being here. Farmer Lee Jones from the Chef's Garden. We're a family-owned business in Huron, Ohio. If you haven't heard of Huron, Ohio, you may have heard of Cedar Point, the amusement park, fastest, tallest, highest roller coasters in the world on Discovery Channel. That's about 6 miles from us. But we're right on Lake Erie. Lake Erie is the shallowest of all the Great Lakes. Consequently, it's the warmest. Provides water for about 11 million people. The Great Lakes are 21% of all of the world's fresh water. It's pretty amazing. We're in a microclimate right along Lake Erie because it's the shallowest. It provides us nice warm temperatures into the fall. We actually have the same growing conditions as Louisville, Kentucky, and we're about 10 hours north of that. There used to be 300 vegetable growers in our county. It was the largest concentration of vegetable growers of any county in the world. Today, if you stretch, there are about 16. One by one, those have diminished and gone away. The water is so critically important. Lake Erie, she provides amazing entertainment and fishing and fun for many, many, many thousands of people during the summer, but the water is just so critical for our livelihood. Staggering statistics that you brought up, and the 21% of all of the world's fresh water is pretty amazing. We're seeing phosphorus and nitrogen going into the water because of misuse or mishandling on the farms. Regenerative agriculture is just so critical. The cover crops can do so much to retain the phosphorus and the nitrogen and prevent that from going into the lakes. It's unbelievable. It's running off, it's going into the lakes, and because it's shallow and because it's warm, it's growing this amazing algal bloom, and it creates toxins and dark spots, and the fish can't even live in it at some points, and so you've got to shut the water off even for supplying fresh water. Really, really critical that we do what we can to take care of this fresh water and protect it for the entire world. I mean, it's a tremendous resource. We're very, very honored to get to work with the lake and do everything we can as a sustainable farm to be able to preserve that water and try and spread the message to other farms on ways to be able to preserve the water.
It's so interesting for the first two responses. First of all, how much you're both impassioned by this, but secondly, how much numbers can tell a story that, we hope people listen to, because your numbers are equally staggering. So, Mayor, you're from the northern Mississippi River.
Yes, sir.
Red Wing, Minnesota. Most think what happens upstream in Red Wing affects a place like Blytheville, Arkansas. How are these cities connected? How are Mississippi River cities connected, whether economically or even in terms of resilience?
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you all for coming.
I'm the mayor of Red Wing, Minnesota, home of the Boot City Red Wing Shoes, and it's really nice to be here with my former mayor, excuse me, Logan. Our communities are undoubtedly connected, not just through our organization of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, excuse me, but also the river. Most think that everything that flows downriver, I shouldn't be concerned with at all. I shouldn't be concerned with your city at all in Blytheville. But the truth is we are interconnected. If the grain from our Red Wing grain elevator can't flow down the river through Blytheville because the water levels are too low, it affects our community. Waterways and ports in the Mississippi River, we have a 10-state corridor, and we move $164 billion in agricultural commodities annually. 55 to 70% of all U.S. exported grain, soy, and wheat move on the Mississippi River, as does 40% of all U.S. agricultural output. Very, very important river. Red Wing's the final stop for many people that cruise the Mississippi on our big river boats. If those boats can't make it upriver, the tourism dollars just don't flow into Red Wing, which, by the way, is Red Wing is the favorite stop for over 90% of the passengers. University of Minnesota did a study last year. In total, the Mississippi River is credited with nearly $400 billion in economic input. $800,000 alone from the economy from the riverboats coming up is what's spent in Red Wing. Resilience is very crucial to operations on our Mississippi River and my community as the hub of that river. All those agricultural exports flow through my city and load in my city, and they all are moved around the world. So when you see something like $20 billion drought, as we've seen in recent years, it slows and limits traffic substantially. Billions of dollars were lost because the water was not high enough to support the barge traffic. Barges up by us are usually 15 barges. They're down to 12 because the drought is moving the channel, and the curves in the channel are too steep for 15 barges to navigate. So we've lost that. They're at about 80% of capacity right now because of the water levels. And our agriculture imports go down, and it costs more money to ship by rail or by truck. So barge traffic is the most economical.
So that's a theme we're going to keep with, the theme of resilience. Mayor Logan, cities face all kinds of pressures when unexpected weather hits. Roads, schools, businesses. You referred a little bit to unexpected weather in your earlier remarks. How do you think about balancing the demands and keeping communities resilient?
It's about partnership and collaborative efforts. And so this organization that we are a part of, MRCTI, does just that. And so what we have done and found ourselves doing is trying to figure out how small cities like my own, who have very limited resources, how do we stay in the know? How do we stay in the wave of change and the wave of resilience and sustainability? And so what we have done recently is partnered with Ducks Unlimited. And Ducks Unlimited, by all means, is this huge company that we are so grateful for. And we are in the business of deploying about 100,000 acres of wetland. And what this land is going to do, it's going to provide like a sponge for those of you who don't understand what I'm saying. And so in times of drought, it releases. And in times of flood, it will absorb. And so up and down the Mississippi River corridor, we want to deploy this land so that we can protect small cities like myself who don't have the resources or would not even have an opportunity on this stage if we weren't interconnected with larger cities like Red Wing, Minnesota, or at the headwaters of Lake Itasca, Bemidji, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans. And so because we formed this coalition, we've become stronger, and it's given a small city like myself a voice. In my city alone, we have a 40% poverty rate. And so it's hard to find resources for grant writing. I'm a very small administration. I'm a strong mayor with a council of 6 people. And so can you imagine trying to navigate the grant world? And so MRCTI links us with those resources so that we can just stay in the game. And that's really important for a small city like myself to just stay in the game. And so we're trying to reestablish circularity in my city. by recycling. Nucor Yamada Steel in Nucor Steel, Arkansas is one of the largest recyclers in the world. And so the river must stay healthy so our economy can flourish. And so I'm just excited that I'm able to meet new people and network on major stages such as this so people can hear our voice. Every city in the United States matters, and it matters what happens to our waterways.
Thank you. That's, again, the story about Ducks Unlimited and 100,000 acres. It's a great example of the kinds of unconventional partnerships that we have to turn to in times like these. Farmer Lee, such a funny thing to call you Farmer Lee.
You can call me anything but late for dinner.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Farming with regenerative methods, I mentioned this before, often means working with the land in new ways. How do you adjust when weather or water patterns don't go as expected? And you talked a little bit about things that are happening to Lake Erie.
Yeah, I mean, regenerative agriculture is really the philosophy that we're following at the Chef's Garden. The past was sustainable agriculture. And sustainable means you're kind of hanging on until you finally let go and you can't hang on anymore. Regenerative is rebuilding. It's rebuilding the people. It's rebuilding the land. It's rebuilding the environment. Conservation and preservation of our water and our soil are so critical that we're not making anymore. And we've got to hang on to this. And regenerative agriculture really does that. If you think about that, we use plants. Up to 16 multi-species of plants to harvest the energy from the sun. But it'll also retain the moisture. And on a dry year, a particularly dry year, it's unbelievable how much moisture you can retain by the cover crops. But also on an extremely monsoon year where you get a lot of excessive water, it'll keep the soil from running off, it'll build the roots down in and allow for the drainage. Everything so interweaves, the soil and the water, the wind erosion, the soil erosion, it's all tied together. It's all works so closely. When the farmers are using the phosphorus and the nitrogen and it's running off in monoculture and going into the lakes, it's causing problems with the algal bloom. And the nutritional levels are going down. Guys, the nutritional level in vegetables, I'm particularly excited about vegetable because we're vegetable farmers. In the last 100 years, the nutritional level in vegetables has gone down 80%. It's not sustainable. At the same time period, a 3,000% increase in kidney, liver, heart, cancer disease, attention deficit disorder, autism, childhood obesity, allergies. Is there anybody in this room that can stand up and say there's not somebody affected by that? It's not sustainable. So preserving that water, looking at how we're taking care of the soil, these cover crops are huge. We can actually identify the mineral deficiencies in the soil, plant the right cover crops, and we're building nutrient levels as high as 300 to 700 times higher than the USDA average. It's exciting, and it all has to interwork with the preservation of this fresh water. You think that wars are scary right now over fossil fuels? What do you think is going to happen when we have to fight for our water? It's coming. We have got to preserve this. It's really critical. It's not if, it's when. I get a little excited about this stuff.
Certainly do.
Hard to believe.
I share your excitement. I share your concerns. I don't know that I've ever been able to express it as
well, come on back to the farm.
As you have.
You're not eating enough fresh vegetables.
I'd have to eat 80% more. Mayor, small towns often have limited resources. What approaches have you seen help communities stay steady during tough times? This is to you, Mayor Cook.
Red Wing, we are hit with unexpected weather, and it means lost dollars for our community. Communities like mine on the Mississippi River are particularly susceptible to these types of issues. If the water's too high, that means the cruise boats can't come in. We lost 5 boats this year because of the high water downriver a little bit. With record flooding last spring, the high water halted riverboat cruises again. We lost about 7 stops out of 21. Local businesses are affected. The barges are affected. They weren't moving. And our basements are flooded. Some of our city buildings are flooded. Those type of things. It's devastating. Most of the flooding is out of Red Wing's control as it comes from further north up in the Twin Cities from the Minnesota River and the Mississippi. That's why we're working through the Minnesota Rivers, Cities, and Trust Initiative that we have partnered with global conservation authorities like Ducks Unlimited, 2 Degrees Apt, Cargill, Black & Veatch, One Architect, and others to complete a study on where to deploy and what kind of natural infrastructure assets that we should scale back, scale up to reduce our disaster risk. Sequential our carbon, limit our methane release, improve water quality, and attract ecologically benefit economic development. Over the next several years, as my fellow mayor has mentioned, we're going to activate over 100,000 acres of climate absorption lands in and around 30 communities in 8 different states. And this will make very critical waterway more reliable for food, manufacturing, agricultural, tourism, and product movement.
So we have about 6 minutes left. I'd like to turn our attention to the future. You've made a very impassioned presentation so far, Farmer Jones, about kind of the present status, but how do you think about keeping land and communities healthy given the present moment we are and looking over the next few decades?
Well, I had the good privilege of working with my father. It's a family business. And he said you could plan on things going exactly like you wanted to on the farm about 20% of the time. And he's right, if you're lucky. It's not if, it's when. There's going to be droughts, and there's going to be excessive water. And it becomes what we do to plan for those. We know that we're going to have years where there's so much water that we're going to get runoff, and you're going to lose good topsoil. It's imperative to maintain that topsoil. Everything that we can do with these cover crops. I mean, you guys are talking about it too. The cover crops will capture the carbon and sink that, but we can also preserve the water. We can lower the soil temperature up to 30 degrees on a hot summer. When it's really dry, and if you got cover crops in there, you can lower that soil temperature 30 degrees. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a huge difference when you're trying to grow vegetable crops in there and you preserve that water. If we have a limited amount, we're doing everything we can to preserve the water, those cover crops can really make a huge difference. We're 70% off grid right now. There's not enough power. Everything is so interlinked. The water, the soil, the power, and where's it going to come from? We're 70% off grid. Our goal is to be 100% off grid by 27. I think that it really becomes about education and conservation of the soil, of the water, and we're going to have to find a way to get more electric. We've got an electric issue. It all ties together. I'm excited about the future, but I'm nervous about the future. We have Thomas Keller. We do business with a lot of chefs all over the country. We ship direct our product direct to chefs. Thomas Keller has a sign in his kitchen that says sense of urgency. Folks, we've got a sense of urgency. I appreciate all of you being here for Climate Week this week. We can make a difference. We have to make a difference. There is a sense of urgency. If there's anything I can do, Farmer Lee Jones on Instagram, The Chef's Garden is the name of our farm. Love to talk to you after or after we get back home. Let's make a difference, folks. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So again, Mayor Logan, from your perspective, there are extreme weather events that are likely to still come. You mentioned some of those already happening. So how do you think, as a mayor of a city with the limitations that you serve with, small community, small council, strong form of mayor government, how do you think about planning for those impacts?
Well, the only way we're going to achieve this goal is to do projects like we're doing. We've mentioned it. You've mentioned it. We have to make this a sense of urgency. And I just want to tell this little story. 2 minutes, I'm out of here. I was on my way here. I stole this from one of my colleagues. And I have an autistic son. And he was, Mom, you're leaving again. I'm leaving again. And so I gave him a puzzle to put together. It was a puzzle of the United States and the world. And on the puzzle, I said, okay, put the puzzle together. I'm going to go pack, and I'll be right back. And we'll talk about it. So as he's putting this puzzle together, I'm thinking it's going to take him about 30, 40 minutes to put the puzzle together, give me time to pack. Well, about 4 minutes later, he came back with the puzzle completed. And I said, what in God's name did you do? I gave you the puzzle of the world and you already put it together. He said, Mom, there was a face of a man standing along the Mississippi River. And I put the man together. And when I put the man together, the entire world came together. So in essence, what I'm saying to you, we have to stop looking at it as just water or just the world. We have to start looking at it as people. When you put the man together, then the entire world comes together. And so I'm small. I might just be one little piece on the Mississippi River, but I depend on what happens in the world to sustain what happens in my little city. And so let's concentrate on one another and what we need as a world.
That's just so beautiful. And I would say the world also depends on us, you know, in a sense that we do the things we can about this issue and about the stresses placed on the world by this issue. So, Mayor, I'm going to let you have the last response here. And it's just kind of how do communities manage together? How do they collaborate together to manage the kinds of stressors that we have seen and will continue to see, maybe even see in an increasing way?
Well, if Red Wing, Pretty Red Wing, is going to increase climate resilience and create a more reliable economy to invest in, we must partner with other cities on the Mississippi River. It's mandatory, as well as our global commodity companies that depend on our resources in the Mississippi River corridor for their bottom line. Companies like Walmart, Pepsi, Cargill, General Mills, Nestle, and others need to help and come together. To mitigate the ongoing climate impacts across our basin that are mostly felt along the Mississippi and main stem of the Mississippi River, we have over 100 mayors through 10 states that came together with global partners to compete our nation's largest natural infrastructure disaster capacity study just last year. Wow. We're making issues prevalent. We're making sure that everyone understands that. MRCTI partnered with 2 Degrees Apt, Cargill, Black & Veatch, One Architect, and others again to complete a study on where to deploy what kind of natural infrastructures that we're talking about and what scale will it reduce our disaster risk. Sequentially, it's going to limit our carbon, limit our methane release, improve water quality, and attract ecological benefits. Further vulnerable, you get what you pay for, folks. Our study will guide us near the medium-term natural infrastructure that we're going to do. You've talked about it with the Mississippi River corridor. It's going to be managed by Ducks Unlimited, and it's one of the world's most conservative authorities on conservation.
Oh, that's fantastic. So thank you. Thanks to the panel. I'm going to end where I started. I'm from Colorado. To the extent we talked about the Mississippi River, we could have been talking a lot of river systems around the world that are under stress in part because of this. And rivers are such an important, I think, metric for us to pay attention to. On the Colorado River right now, we're renegotiating a compact from 1922, but there's a real chance that the drought in the West, the mega drought in the West, is so significant that the hydroelectric at Lake Powell and Lake Mead discontinue altogether because of what's called dead pools, meaning there's just not enough water flowing into those 2 lakes for them to remain hydroelectric. They provide electricity to 40 million people. And it's really an important point. The Mississippi, we've stressed the Mississippi Lake Erie today, but this is, I think, a global issue and a good framework for us to continue to look at as we think about climate and the issues around it. So thank you very much. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Please welcome Alicia Orcena Ibarra, Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of Mexico.
Good morning to everyone. On behalf of Mexico, I'm going to speak today, and I'm going to do it on behalf of my female president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who is an expert on climate change, by the way, and the first woman to become president in 200 years. That's what it is. Yes, yes. And we have to admit that the Climate Week is more than a gathering. It is a moral summon. It calls us to acknowledge the reality before us. Climate change is not only the greatest challenge of our time, but it's also an opportunity to reshape our societies, our economics, towards justice, sustainability, and peace, frankly speaking. We are facing like the last chance. Every second counts and to fight against climate change. So we know that the science is unequivocal. Even people don't admit it, but we know that. The World Meteorological Organization warned us that 2024 was the hottest year in the history. So, and we, coming from the global south and from Mexico, actually, we know that we are not the greatest emitters of the world. We account for 11% of the global emissions. So one of our main priorities is really adaptation, frankly speaking. And also, we know that climate justice is not an abstract notion, but it's really a must. And I really do think that this is the outcome of a very failed model, a model that has been based on extractive industries, on extraction, on, I would say, on overusing our natural resources. And that has to change. And that's why we need a paradigm shift. Because previously we heard from Vanuatu and from Antigua and Barbuda, I mean, hurricanes and wildfires and droughts are forcing migration and costing a lot of money and a lot of lives. So what are the twin gaps that we have in front of us? First of all, financing. And I don't know if we're going to get that, addressed or really fixed in the COP30. I doubt it, frankly speaking. Going from billions to trillions, I think this is not happening. So I guess we have to find innovative ways of financing in a different way, like bonds, for example, like the hurricane clauses that Grenada put in place. That is when a hurricane hits small island state or even a big state, then you can go into a moratorium to pay your debt. That for me is something that is more concrete. Or if we can use the special drawing rights for to use it for climate change or for adaptation. So what we're trying to do in Mexico, of course, we are preparing ourselves for the NDC 3, but it has become more difficult because now that fossil fuels are in certain way back in the world, because it's true, they are back. And we are a country that produces fossil fuels, so it's quite difficult to move from in certain way, phasing out the fossil fuels and coming into renewable energy. But even though that it's difficult, we have to make it. And the way we are building up the NDC 3 is by community participation. Because you just heard, I was just listening to the previous panel, if you don't take into account the local communities, the majors that are facing, for example, the rivers and the problems they have with the crops, if we don't take into account these people, the NDC 3 becomes theory, and it's like a top-down exercise that doesn't take us anywhere. So that's why we are going to build a NDC that is consulted with communities, with the other sectors, basically with the energy sector, of course, with Pemex. God save us, but anyway, that's what we have to do. God save us, but anyway. And then we are going to try to build an absolute mitigation target, a very robust national adaptation plan, because we were hit by a big hurricane in Acapulco. You may remember this, the Otis, that really vanished the Acapulco coastline. And it was because we lost all the mangroves, because there was no forest, because the hotels were very close to the coast. I mean, that's the model that we have to counteract. We have to fight against that model. But the other three things that I believe are crucial is linking climate change with biodiversity. Solutions based on nature, I think, are the key for countries like ours, where we do have a biodiversity, where we have national parks, that we can certainly compensate some of these greenhouse gases with the protection of natural resources. And of course, circular economy. Circular economy is the other part that we are really building up a lot in Mexico. That is waste zero. That is to phase out methane, because it's not only CO2, frankly speaking, we're talking about methane, which is the other big thing. Just to close, I have to say that recently, together with Correa del Lago, with Andrea Correa del Lago, which you listened before, we organized the first Latin American and Caribbean meeting in Mexico. You know, our region is very fragmented, frankly speaking. When it comes to climate change, we have a group that participates here, another group that, it's very fragmented. So what we did is we brought everybody together. Not to agree on anything, but just to take a stock of what everybody thinks. We had Chile, we had Colombia, we had 22 ministers of all the region. And I think that the main points that we agree upon is, first of all, adaptation. Adaptation for Latin America and the Caribbean is a priority. Number two is the synergies between biodiversity and climate change and desertification, the Rio agreements. And four, loss and damage funding. And that is insurance companies should come in. We have to find out how can we do this together. And let me invite you, we're going to have a Climate Action Week in Mexico in October. All of you are invited. We want you to come. We want societies to collaborate because we are sure that we have to fight for something here in the UN. You know, the military budgets have soared. Now we have 2.7 trillion annually for military. And wow, I mean, what are we doing in the world? This is going for military? Even in Mexico, 40% of the budget goes to military and only 2% goes to environment. Come on. I mean, why are we doing, what are we doing with the wrong priorities? And I think we have to really make sure that we, of course, number one, defend the multilateral climate regime, guarantee fair finance, and third, we have to link climate action with social and economic policies, but we have to do it bottom up. So let me tell you, we don't have a plan B. I don't think the world has a plan B at all. I mean, the Paris Accord is 10 years old, but we have the Paris Accord en punto, with all the countries except one. Okay, fine, we're going to do it. We have to make it happen, but we also don't have a planet B. So let us act with courage, solidarity, because this is the historic moment for us, for our generation. Thank you so much.
Secretary Barcena Ibarra, for that inspiring and urgent speech. You've, of course, reminded us that climate change is not just an environmental challenge, it's a test of our ethics and our ability to act boldly. We truly appreciate that intervention. Now, we're going to take a short networking break. Make the most of it, but be sure to return promptly so we can kick off the second part of the opening ceremony and continue exploring the case of acceleration, and we'll see you back here soon.